I got it. Got it.
Okay, good.
All right. Welcome everybody. This is Nick Legamara. I got Eric Sage and my very good friend and special guest today, Sylvia. I'm going to say Sylvia because I know how hard it is to have a last name that's difficult to pronounce, that people mess it up. So I'm not even going to do it. Sylvia, go ahead and say your last name because you say it so much more elegantly than I do.
Interlongsi.
See, I can't even say it after you told it to me.
Yeah, I can't either.
But Sylvia is actually in the Texas area, and she actually, for people that are familiar with creative financing, structuring, is in the Scott Horn office. Done many deals with Sylvia and Scott both. They're a great resource in the event that you guys are in the Texas and also in the Arizona market. We have a lot of people that are in the Arizona market that do deals, and then we also have the a light version that we can maybe talk about as we go into the call on how you might be able to do things outside of those two states. But really what the point of the call today is from an educational standpoint relative to RMLO. I want to talk about what RMLO is, maybe what it is not, why the need is for RMLO, and then how that obviously impacts the investor or the bank or the lender, whoever it might be in this model, because a lot of people are going to create the note by being the seller financer on the property, but a lot of people aren't going to stay in these deals, Sylvia, and aren't going to hold these notes forever. They might hold them for a short period of time. They might hold a portion of it. They might do something like a partialing or hypothecation. So all of that underwriting file and that stack file is a critical component to the valuation of that note on the exit side of it. So first thing I want to talk about is really why RMLO, like how it came about, why it's important today, and just to start have a little conversation. And then we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So I'll keep my eye on the clock. We'll probably go maybe 35, 40 minutes, and then we'll open up the questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, put it into the chat box. We're going to record this and we'll post it into the private Facebook group. So you're more than welcome to go back and review it. Any of the show notes or any of that stuff that we generate, if we have a checklist or some protocol or procedures that we want to use, we'll make sure we make that available as well as there. So Sylvia, how long have you been doing underwriting now? I mean, and more specifically, the RMLO side of this. So I know you used to work for a bank in a public capacity, or
Right.
I guess private. So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right. So I've done, conventional loans and now doing the seller finance underwriting and, specifically only just to seller finance transactions. And I've done numerous, I guess I've been doing it for maybe about 6 years. And so I've, pretty much working with a real estate attorney under, I guess, his wing for a while. We've pretty much come across so many different process and procedures, developed it for specifically seller finance transactions. As everybody knows on here, it's such a niche-y thing. And, an RMLO, per Dodd-Frank, you're, as a seller finance, you're supposed to be able to qualify your buyers and make sure that they have, the ability to repay. Well, as investors, you want to be able to, that's not what you do. That's not your forte. So, when you hire a third-party servicer like us, then, we take that burden off of you to where we're qualifying your buyer. We pretty much mimic the conventional world as far as we take care of all the disclosures, all the income documents that we're collecting from your buyer. And this satisfies you as the lender, or as a lender / creditor, satisfies that third-party service, the origination license. A lot of people go, well, do I have to be licensed as a, as a seller finance person? And, the answer to that is today is no. You're allowed to hire a third-party service.
But we're actually seeing some changes in the law in different states, right? Sometimes you're, under Dodd-Frank, I think it's depending on the state, is it 3? You can do 3 for free, basically, right?
Right.
But that's not, even if you're only doing one seller financing transaction, it's highly recommended that we use a RMLO and a servicing company, because it can really affect the overall value of that note in the back end. So even though you're not necessarily required to under Dodd-Frank, it's all, some states don't require you to wear a seatbelt driving on the freeway, but it's probably a good idea that you do, right?
Absolutely.
So we want to make sure that we do that. And I think I just saw something in some states where they're, it's even on the first did I read that correctly? Even maybe on the first deal that there has to be, you have to be a licensed underwriter, or they're getting ready to change the law. I think Texas actually is something that's looking at being changed right now, correct?
On some states, you don't have those three freebies at all. But if you're going to do this and you're going to set yourself up as a reputable investor and seller, you want to protect yourself and be able to have this RMLO, have your buyers go through an RMLO, and at that point, like Nick said, if you've got an exit strategy where you want to sell the note, then you've got a qualified package that will bring you more bang for your buck. And if for ever any reason there's anything that comes into question, just having that security, saying, well, you know what, we went through an RMLO. An RMLO is the title RMLO is a residential mortgage loan originator. That entitles us.
Sometimes we hear the term MLO, right?
Right.
And when the term MLO is used, does that mean they could be doing a commercial loan origination as well as a residential, or is there really one and the same?
They're really one and the same, but if you're doing commercial, they're going to refer to that person as an MLO. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just got a little comment that said some of your sound may sound a little distorted. Do you have a adjustment on your microphone by chance, Sylvia? You sound okay to me, but I some people might have a little different thing. So
okay.
Hey Nick, so we were talking about it today. Can you guys hear me? Is everybody good? All right. So I was gonna say, we were talking about today is it more important to have a qualified buyer, a borrower, or is it what's more important, the asset or the borrower? And you and I agreed, now within reason, the borrower is more important in this deal than the asset in most instances, because and we talked about it was, well, if that condition of the property is questionable, but you have a qualified borrower, in my experience, what's happened, because I've done full renovations, got great down payments, and have amazing borrowers, right? Well, as our market changes and we have less inventory, people are going to, especially if you're providing seller financing, you literally could do nothing to the property. And so you'll have a qualified borrower in a property that needs renovation. So now all of a sudden you have a really good borrower, that property needs a renovation, right? So this is where Sylvia comes in and qualifies that borrower, and they put the right down payment. They have proof of income. They have all the things that fit this amazing loan that we create. And then you drive by you sell it to them, and you drive by that property 6 months from now on that property that needed a little bit of love, right? I've been around for a while. So my very first property wasn't a renovated property. And then I added value to it. So now our borrowers are now going and putting their own sweat equity into it, as well as a down payment and making payments. That borrower is even that more solid, because it's their home. It's where they live. It's not an apartment. It's not. And so what I always do, and I told Nick this the other day, I drove by a property. I did an amazing renovation on the inside. And then I drive by the property, and at my cost, it was probably a $50,000 landscape package and new awning that they put out front for the sitting area. And they did all this amazing stuff, right? And so that now my loan has just got that much more value, because there's less risk, because now the house is up by another $100,000 in value from what I paid.
So you mitigate the risk, because I personally like to do less rehab as possible. That's what we talk about in our training.
Especially now. Yes.
Especially now, because what it's going to allow you to do is it's going to give the borrower a better deal, because they're going to have a lower cost to entry, lower price point to get in. And two, they're going to likely make it better. But really, the other thing we have to look at is from the in my opinion, Sylvia, you can add to your position on this. The value of the underwriting in the RMLO is that, because here's the thing, the service that you do does not does not protect us as a lender, right? It is just a recommendation on if the borrower meets the certain minimum requirements to be underwritten per the guidelines, right? But here's our challenges we have, because we're basically small cap lenders, seller finance, whatever the term is that you want to use. Here's the challenge, and this is the risk part of what we do. We're a business. The borrower is a consumer. So you start dealing with stuff with the CFPB and things along those lines, you better make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, because if you don't, you can create yourself a problem. And this is the main thing I see, because Eric and I do a lot of note purchasing. And when we look at there's $25 billion a year in notes that are written by individuals that are all like people that are listening to this right now. Okay. Eric and myself being part of that $25 billion market. The majority of those notes are not written correctly. They might be written from the underwriting standpoint that they maybe meet minimum requirements. Maybe they weren't even part of the minimum requirements because they only did one deal. The problem with that is that you don't want to get yourself being a predatory lender. You don't want to get yourself into a position where there's a 3-year clawback and all those things. And that's why what you do, in my opinion, is so valuable at any cost, because it doesn't protect the seller or the investor or the bank from any legal potential actions, but it does give them the information and the file that says the borrower said this, you validated it, they signed the disclosures and everything. And so for the best, from the information that the borrower provided to us, the seller or the bank, because we're one and the same, the loan looks good. So what would you add to that, Sylvia, from a liability or a protection standpoint, is how that helps protect and provide a quality underwriting package?
Well, the key word there for you as an investor is that you don't want to have, you want to not be considered, a predatory lender. Well, we pretty much, if you send your loan through an RMLO, you're pretty much going to be guaranteed that you're going to have that protection, because we won't allow you to go into a high cost mortgage. Okay, we're going to keep you.
And there's nothing wrong with the high cost mortgage. But what happens when the problem with most people have is that when they do it, they don't know they're writing a high cost mortgage. That's number one, because the index is the APR, which is is it average prime offer rate or annual prime offer?
Right. No, it's the average prime offer rate.
Average prime offer rate, which is a government index. And it says if there's no underlying liens on it, you can write at whatever that index is at 6.5%. So let's take that into consideration a second. What is what's the latest APOR index right now?
It's 2.93.
2.93. So by definition, you can write a first lien, and we'll talk about why, because we write a lot of first and second liens, and we want to dive into that in a second. We'll explain why we do it and the value in doing it. But if you take 2.93 plus the 6.5%, right? That means you can write a 9.43% mortgage. So what happens when somebody writes a 9.5% mortgage? Because they've been writing 9.5% for the last year, and they didn't realize the index went down. What did they just do? They just created a high cost mortgage. And talk about what happens when you have a high cost mortgage. What needs to happen? What has to be done from the borrower's perspective to keep that in compliance?
And everything's about disclosure, right? So if we're going into a high cost mortgage, then I would give you the direction as to what to do next. If you're set on that interest rate and want to move forward, then we will disclose to the buyer the high cost mortgage. And pretty much what they have to do is they have to take a counseling class. It's mandatory. It's like an 8-hour class. 9 times out of 10, they want it. I believe they're on weekends. And we struggle with getting our buyers to go do that because, more than likely they're nobody wants to go to this finance class. And that's what it is. It's just kind of teaching them how to pay their principal, what the principal really means, what the interest really means. taxes and insurance. What does this mortgage look like for them? Do they really understand, the details of that and whatnot? But it is an 8-hour class. They
Oh,
take
it's
it,
8
do a
hours.
certificate.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even say, I don't, I personally don't do high cost mortgage because one, I don't need to. And we want to try to make this as fair and equitable for the buyer as much as possible. I mean, obviously we're not a charity, don't get me wrong, but we want to
Right.
put the borrower in position to succeed, right? So by writing in conjunction to what the guidelines are and keeping it a qualified mortgage, which is no different than Chase or Fargo or B of A or whoever's writing the note, that to me, that is a good thing. There's a lot of, you see it probably quite a bit. There's a lot of people that write high cost mortgages. They just do. And there's nothing wrong with it. We just choose not to because we're trying to put, because when we write notes, and I think this is really important to say this. When I write a note personally, my intention is to keep it in perpetuity for as long as it will be there, right? So we're writing 30-year mortgages, right? We're writing 30-year terms. We know that the borrower isn't necessarily going to be in that property under our lending for 30 years, but we don't know that. I mean, I've got loans that I've done from the first ones I've done that are going on 12 or 13 years of being in service right now. So the point that I'm making is that when we do this, we want to make sure that not only is the borrower underwritten correctly, because we are the bank. When we're the bank, we want to have our investment secure because that's what we're creating. We're creating a note to the borrower and we're going to get a cash flow stream, whether it be a first lien, second lien, or both, for as long as that borrower continues to pay. So it doesn't make sense. It makes perfectly good sense to me to take the little bit of time on the front side, underwrite the borrower correctly at whatever the cost is. And here's the good thing. We just pass that cost on to the borrower anyway. That 850 or 1,000 or 1,200, depending on who the RMLO is and where the area is and what level of service you have done, it's going to get passed on. Plus, we can roll a portion of that into the note anyway. Let's talk about the origination, because this is where a lot of people also that create their own notes that don't use a servicer, I think, lose out on an opportunity to get a little bit, be able to recapture some of these costs. So let's talk a little bit about what we're required to put into the loan on the loan origination fee, how your fees impact that, and how we benefit as a bank on being able to roll some of that those extra fees into our notes.
On most notes that depending on the dollar amount, and right now we're seeing averages of $150,000 to $200,000 notes. You can charge up to 3% origination fee. We can charge a total of 3% of the origination fee, and so that would be 3% of the loan amount minus our fees, and then minus the setup cost for your servicing.
Right.
Other than that, then you can.
So if it's $150,000 note, we can actually add another $4,500 worth of fees to that loan. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if your cost of servicing is $1,000, let's say, for example, then $1,000 gets deducted off the 4,500, and we can actually collect the additional 3,500 in the note itself. Is that correct?
Or add it into the note, or add it in their down payment, or add it in the closing costs.
Well, we want to roll it in the note if possible, because we get paid interest on it. So if they want to pay, the borrower is always free to pay down anything, because all these notes have no prepayment penalty, and they can put as much down in for extra principal as they choose to. So what are some of the characteristics of the underwriting package? Because most people, I don't say most people, but a lot of people that are probably listening and watching this have maybe had a bank loan. They went down to Chase or Wells Fargo and got a traditional mortgage from a bank. What's the similarities and the differences between what you do as an underwriter and then what somebody in-house might be do with Chase or Wells Fargo?
Again, we actually mimic the same procedure as if you and I were to go to a bank and get a mortgage loan anywhere. We literally mimic everything from the disclosures are mandatory. Disclosures, as a loan officer, we get audited. All of our files are audited. So, we are always, making sure that we have the correct disclosures to the buyer and whatnot, but they go through the same process. The only difference is that you as a lender, the requirements to approve your buyer are just a little, they're just less, they're not as tight as it would be if they go to the bank.
Right, because the bank has to, they have a minimum DTI requirement, they have a minimum
Correct.
credit score requirement. I mean, like FHA, like you were, I don't know how much, you probably don't follow the traditional side, but I think the minimum FHA score was like 620 or somewhere around there, if I'm not mistaken, right? But if you look at the actual loans that are being written by FHA, they're well over 700. So it's just the guidelines. The difference is that traditional banks change their rules all the time on the criteria. And I think we talked about this on a podcast or something before, Eric, where back in March of 2020, when the pandemic first hit, 100 people that had been underwritten for approval, that same 100 people, August of 2020, 3 months later, only about 65 of them would actually qualify now, with nothing changing in their borrower profile. The job didn't change, their DTI didn't change, credit score didn't change. What changed was the bank's propensity for risk.
And so think about the opportunity as seller finance lenders, like guys like us. Think of the opportunity we have now. We have even better borrowers to lend money to,
Yeah.
But we're also not charging mortgage insurance. We're not charging all these things. So we can charge a premium interest and give them the same result. I mean, Nick and I just looked at one today that was it was a sub-2 deal with mortgage insurance. Like literally that will never go away, I don't think. I mean, the way they structure these now, it's not good. So the one thing I want to say, we can get into the technical side, because Nick and I, we just hire Sylvia and she does all the work for us, and we trust that it's done. She's the who of making sure our borrower is qualified. And the reason we do that is so when we create our own notes, if we don't buy pools and we go find a house, typically we find it at market value or less, and it depends on the terms. And then we sell it retail. So we make some spread there, and we put a qualified borrower who's a deserving borrower, doesn't want to be a tenant anymore, and has a down payment and wants to own and have a long-term 30-year mortgage. What it does is it makes our life as investors, we talk about, is it a rental properties versus, multifamily versus loans? Well, there's a scalability model here where you could have 100 loans, 200 loans, your servicer basically does all the work. And if you've underwritten, and Nick and I know this,
let's make sure we don't use servicer interchangeably. I would say underwriting and servicing, because servicing might mean a different thing or the actual servicing in the note. So what Sylvia is doing is the underwriting and the RMLO work, but go ahead. I just want to make sure.
Right. But I just want to explain.
But I want to make sure the people listening, when they hear servicing, they don't confuse it with something else.
Right. So, but my point to all this is for me as the investor, it's like, how many of these can I never stress, like one of the big stresses out of owning turnkey rental properties or apartments is the management and taking care of roofs and all this other stuff. And then, and getting that depreciation, which is great, and all these other things. But with notes, like once you set it, literally you forget it. And I just had a note. I mean, how many people in this day and age have their tenants paying double rent in 1 month?
Never.
They're not paying, number one, a lot of them, and they're not giving you double or triple or 6 times. I mean, I've had, in this month alone, I had someone pay me double. They just made a principal payment, which was great. And then I had one person that hadn't paid in 6 months, but they were the owner. They've been living in this house since 2012, I think, and made, I think it was 7 or 8 payments they got, and then they just paid it. So like, that's not happening with any of my tenants right now. I can tell you that right now. We have a huge opportunity.
Yeah. What I want to make sure that people understand is that how little Sylvia, let's just answer the question. How many borrowers do you think you've underwritten for me over the years? And it doesn't be exact number, just swing it.
Gosh, I mean,
hundreds,
a gazillion.
hundreds.
Yes, hundreds.
How often? Yes. Let's talk about this process here. How often do you and I talk on the phone relative to those hundreds of borrowers that we sent in for underwriting?
Not very much.
Not very much.
Not very much. He sends me, he sends me files, and we communicate through email and we, but I mean, of course, we've got this routine now where I just know his expectations. We've talked about, how his, we've learned how he set up his models, his business models and whatnot. And, I mean, it was something that we discussed in detail and made sure that, it was good for him and it was acceptable and everything was within guidelines and whatnot. And, I mean, as far as communicating on files, whenever a file does, I mean, he literally just hands the baton over to me.
Because it's a system and a
over.
process, and we just implement the system and the process, right? So
Right.
what basically happens every time I send, or somebody on our team sends over a borrower for underwriting, it's pretty much this simple. We send the executed contract and we send the terms of the deal. What's the interest rate? What's the term? That's it. And if we're doing a first and a second lien, we say what the first lien amount is going to be and what the second lien amount and the interest rate is going to be. And that's it. And then Sylvia goes and does what she does, creates the underwriting file, which is about 100 pages. And all this stuff is in the vault inside. For anybody that's part of the Creative Deal Maker masterclass, it's already there. So all this is already there from everything that we're talking about in detail today is part of that. So we'll put this recording in the resource section. If you're not a member of creativedealmaker.com, go check it out. You can watch some of the videos and see if it's the right thing for you. If it is, great. If not, no big deal. But everything that's in there, where I'm going with this is what Sylvia does for us as the RMLO is the same thing that's available in this whole process from acquisition to disposition for other services as well, whether it be the servicing of the note, whether it be the creating of the documents for the note itself. All those steps are all outsourced to qualified, competent individuals like Sylvia. And Sylvia just happens to be one of many RMLOs that we trust with our clients to go do what they get paid to do, and which is underwrite the borrower. And that's where we are today. So is there anything unique about seller financing and underwriting the borrower relative to a traditional lender? I mean, to me, I don't see it, but maybe there's something that you would know that I might be missing or somebody might have. And then we'll probably jump into questions here in a minute.
As far as the qualifying the buyer and whatnot, again, we collect all the income documents from the buyer, but there are different, from the small business entity compliance guidelines, there's different things that we underwrite this type of mortgage versus a conventional type of mortgage. Again, we try to follow everything as it is, but there's one thing that's consistent is the ability to repay. You as the lender, as the seller, have the due diligence of making sure that your buyer has the ability to repay. Well, what does that mean? How do we do that? We're always abreast to all the different guidelines, and how can we, you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, you can't do this with the undocumented buyer. You can't do this with so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, we took all those questions way back when, and we said, okay, why can't we do this? We've explored it. We've talked to different attorneys. We've talked to, we investigated the laws, the reasons, and then we found, oh, yes, you can, but this is the way you can do it. A lot of people will just shoot you down and say, no, you can't. Because they don't really know.
They don't know.
They don't know. They haven't.
Confused mind always says no, right? So they say, if they say no, they think no means illegal, and that's just not the case.
And that's just not the case. Exactly.
Let's talk about this, because we're in Texas, and we do a lot of underwriting with I-10 borrowers, which is
correct.
Let's talk about I-10 versus Social Security and why we're allowed to write to I-10 borrowers, or ITIN, or whatever you want to call it. First of all, what's an I-10? What is an I-10 buyer?
Well, so the I-10 buyer, your I-10 buyer is going to be the person who, who is an undocumented person that has a business here in the States and is trying to follow, the law as much as they can. And, they've created this business, and they want to pay their taxes, and they want to try to, develop this relationship with the U.S. and whatnot, and they want to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to follow what they know to follow the law is. But we can underwrite loans for them. They get so you don't have a social security number and they don't pay tax, you can't pay taxes, you don't have a social security number. They go and apply for this ITIN number, which is an individual taxpayer's identification. And what they do is they get presented with this number, which now that just means that the IRS can come in and say, okay, now you owe these taxes, and they want to pay their taxes and whatnot. So there's some consumers out there that will report to an ITIN number. We always will ask for the social or an ITIN number so that we say we can run their credit. When we say that, we're not running their credit to evaluate what their credit scores are and what their history looks like. We're really looking for number one, we want to see what their debts are. If they've got an ITIN number, like I said, there's some consumers out there that will report to an ITIN number. So we have there's credit numbers on those ITINs. Maybe it does happen. I've seen hundreds of them actually that have started, and I think more consumers are starting to report to that ITIN number. And so we pull their debts from there. If there's any type of, when we run credit though for the regular person, I mean, we're looking for again their debts, and we're looking to see if there's any other red flags as far as is there any tax liens, or is there like this huge child support tax lien, or any other type of liens that are current that we might need to let know about. And so other than that, that's again, that's what we pull their credit for. And they will have, these undocumented buyers will have some items reported to it. Now, if they don't have a social security and they don't have an ITIN, we can still underwrite it. You just have to know at that point, what information do we have to pull from them, collect from them in order to do that. And all that is alternative lines of credit. So if you don't have a social or an ITIN, you can still underwrite. You as a lender can still approve that buyer. We would have, at that point, we would have said, okay, so if you don't have this, you don't have A, B, and C on the list, let's go to item number C. And what is that? That's alternative lines of credit. And then that's when we start getting, collecting all that information. So by the time and you more than likely won't know any of this, because when I give you that package, we've already done our due diligence as to how they were being able to be approved for you.
But I think it's the reason why I brought that question up, and I think it's important, is because we can do things that traditional lenders cannot do, right? Absolutely. It's funny that you can have the right to work in the United States and have an ITIN number and pay taxes, but not go down to the bank and get a loan. That's true, right?
That's true.
Can you pay taxes in the United States, have a tax return, and not have a social security number and have an ITIN number and walk into Wells Fargo and get a bank loan to buy a house? Yes or no, Sylvia?
No.
Well, I know you know that.
There are, I mean, I'm in Arizona, so I can tell you right now that I have a list of people that are out there right now that have either they aren't documented or they are, but they've been paying rent, they've been paying cell phone bills, they've been paying, they have bills that fit the box, that check the boxes for you to say, yes, Eric isn't documented, but he's been paying this rent at $950 a month for this long, this cell phone, this insurance, this car payment, this all of a sudden now you're a qualified borrower. You've got $50,000 down. You can afford $3,000 a month because you're showing me your income. Let's go get you a house. I can't wait to lend you the money. I mean, are you kidding me?
Absolutely.
They're lining up. Like I have it right now. I was telling Nick this. I have 5 people right now that have $50,000 sitting there for a down payment in a specific neighborhood, because this is where they live. This particular borrower lives, and $3,000 a month. That's what they can afford. And I'm like, well, that's easy for me. I mean, I can get 15 wholesale properties that fit that demographic, that model, and I won't have to do a thing to it. And they will renovate it better than I could ever do for half the price, half the time. And they'll have a home for their family and their kids and their parents, and they'll never move. And the price points are going up so high now, which I will tell you in the past for me is our price points were low. We were actually paying off too soon. So then I was going to have to go figure out where to put my money. So now our median home price in Arizona is $415,000. And so if they can get something in that, you're at 150 to 200, where in Arizona now it's like 350 to 400, and the math still works. The payment still works. everything works. It's just a good model. And so with that kind of money down and that kind of equity, sweat equity into the property,
Yeah,
I feel
that's
you got
not,
a pretty
that's,
good
those
return
are,
on
those are
investment.
non-issues, right? So Sylvia, what is the, I mean, this is, I mean, Eric brought this up. How much money do you think, how many, people think that buyers need seller financing because they can't qualify, but what that's really, they can't qualify under traditional terms, but how much money do these borrowers typically have? I mean, what do you see?
You know, it's, the average is going to be 30,000 plus.
$30,000 cash. And
30,000
these are
cash.
primarily people that are probably blue collar workers that are making 15, 20, $30 an hour.
Hey, let me just
Yeah,
tell you,
they-
full disclosure, when the market crashed in 2007, I was a seller finance buyer and I had 200,000 down. So don't discriminate on,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, if
That
we're
was the point that I'm
self-employed
trying
and
to
we're
make.
doing our thing, I mean, we all
100%.
fit the deal. And like someone said, they'll do anything for their castle, and it's the truth. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, they take a lot of pride in buying, to buying property and having this piece of land saying that it belongs to them. And I'll tell you what, they really, they'll, not pay anything else, but they want to make sure that they're going to pay that piece of property. And like you said earlier, Eric, they actually will take your property and improve
Yeah.
on this property that they're owning, and they take such pride in it. And it's amazing to see what they, just by talking to them when I'm doing their loans, and they tell me all these plans that they have with this house. And I mean, they've already got this concept of what this may not be the ideal house shell that they have, but they just want that land, that shell, and they're going to expand it, and they're going to improve in your property. If anything happens, and I mean, you're building equity just by letting them, buy your property for, so
This
yeah.
is why Nick and I created the Creative Deal Maker, because I feel like I have an obligation to share our successes, and Nick's done 700 plus deals, to be able to provide home ownership to people that deserve it, because it's security. Like what's your return on rent? We talk about zero.
Yeah.
Like people will pay. And so I feel like I have an obligation, and Nick and I have an obligation to share, and Sylvia, your knowledge to that. This is a really good business, number one. But not only that, when you get a picture with a family that you just lent money to, and they have this house that they now can have, they were renting 5 doors down 3 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden they're homeowners. Like, think about that. It's a pretty cool business, and we
To
can
be
make a
able to
lot
give
of money
back to the
doing it, as well as
community.
provide amazing service.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to provide home ownership to hardworking people when other people have basically told them no is a good thing. And like I said earlier, we're not a charity, but if there's a will, there's a way, and we can solve that problem, because that's what we want to do. So Sylvia, I'm going to jump over to the questions here in a second. So
Okay.
I think the thing that would be extremely helpful is that if you can, and I'll put this in our show notes and in our resource center, maybe do you have something that we can share with listeners, like a checklist or something, like the protocol or the procedures on how the RMLO process works because obviously we don't want to have a bunch of phone calls or emails bombarding you. Like here's a step. I already know what it is, but
Right.
something that we can share and say, here are the 10 steps to doing underwriting your deal. Here's what we need. Here's what you don't need. And here's how we're going to do it. And just talk about that. And then I think that would be good. So
Yeah, sure.
I think, let me just go into these questions real quick. So I'm going to ask these to Sylvia. So the first question is, are you licensed in RMLO in all 50 states? And if no, which states are you licensed in? So how do you, and you can talk about it. And I will say this, regardless of where Sylvia is or isn't licensed, through the Creative Deal Maker Masterclass, we have multiple RMLOs in multiple states that can help facilitate that. So even if Sylvia is in there, the process isn't going to change. And that's why I wanted to bring Sylvia in here, because she understands exactly the model that we underwrite and deal, whereas other RMLOs may not be that familiar with what we do, honestly, in Ohio or, Indiana or wherever it might be. So tell us about where you are licensed right now, where you think you're going to be licensed, and where, some of the, areas that you might not do deals in.
Sure. I'm currently licensed in Texas and in Arizona. We are looking to bring in probably 2 additional states, probably Florida and
Missouri?
Probably by the end of the year, maybe Missouri, yes. Now, as far as being licensed and having the ability to be the loan originator for your deals in these states, this is why we're licensed in those states. We can still, we can still process your loans in any state. So we're still collecting the 1003. We're still doing our due diligence as far as, proving the ability to repay, doing the qualified mortgages, all that other good stuff. We will be using an underwriting method for that, and not the RMLO method, which is still, it's still the same procedure. It's just a matter of the documentation that we will take. But if you've got some deals in Ohio, we're not licensed there, we can still underwrite that package for you. And I will say this, there are, when you go into different states or into an underwriter that does all 50 states, a lot of them, just be aware, a lot of them will have a fee that's a real small fee, and you're like, oh great, this is awesome, they're doing this and they're doing that. When it comes down to it, they might be doing, or they will be doing a lot less work on their end, and they're going to put a lot more work for you on your end. I know that our fees aren't, our fees are pretty, they're pretty, they're not astronomical. They're
What
not,
are your fees?
we do go ahead. Our fees are $950. Okay. We do charge upfront $350 to the to the buyer when we disclose to them, and we have we have had a signed disclosure for the intent to proceed. Well, by the time we do disclosures, we've already collected all their income tax.
Yeah.
They're already moving forward with this. We call it an application fee, but the application fee is part of our broker fee. So they will get credited for that $350 at closing as well. It's just an upfront fee. And these are things that we've sort of like I've worked with Nick for a lot of years, and it's something that, before in a previous business model, he's helped us as much as we've helped him develop what we have today here at Owner Finance Network, and other companies that I've worked with. When you start collecting that fee from your buyer, they're, the ones that are like, yes, anything you want, here's this fee, and you let them know that it's going to be applied towards their closing costs. It's another way of vetting them. It's another way of making sure that they've got some skin in the game. It's another way of making sure that, that if you're going to go do all these repairs, maybe you're not doing repairs until the end of, until you know that this buyer is really going to move forward. Well, then, you start you start connecting all these dots and going, okay, we're really moving forward with them, and we need to do what we need to do. But so I've been doing a lot of research on other underwriting teams and whatnot, and they'll charge anywhere from $300 to $500, but you're doing a lot of the legwork. With us, you send us a sales contract with the buyer, and that's pretty much it. As long as I have the terms, I'll bug Nick if I don't have terms, because I want to disclose the terms, from the very get-go correctly and upfront to the buyers and whatnot. And once we have that, then, we do all the legwork for you. We'll start calling the buyer, we'll start collecting their income docs, we'll start training them, telling them, they might tell you, or your marketing agent, I don't have a way of getting these documents to, I don't have a scanner, I don't have this, I don't have that. Well, we'll hold their hand and show them how and what. We'll give them ideas, we'll give them suggestions, things that they didn't think about, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so we do all that. We'll disclose to the buyer without you even, you've got that peace of mind with us when you send us that sales contract, that by the time you hear from us again, unless there's an issue, but
yeah, it's pretty much full service, and there's self-service, I would say, maybe, or less than full service. And I think this was the question that was asked: is there any pre-qualifications you expect the lender to do on the borrower before we ask the borrower to reach out to you to do? We just refer the borrower to you. So here's how we do it. Okay, we have to have an executed contract. Okay, we ask the borrower up front if they, do they meet the down payment requirement that we have as a lender. Okay. And then we ask a series of a handful of questions, to determine their, initially what their affordability is. Right. And then from there, we collect a deposit, and well, we use a deposit or earnest money or whatever it is in your state. And then that gets sent to the RMLO, and then with the terms of the deal, and then they call the borrower in. We don't take any of the financial information. We don't collect the 1003 application. We don't verify income or employment or any of that stuff. That's what Sylvia and her team does, or any RMLO will do to underwrite that borrower. So I think that answers the question. And some of them might say it's your job to collect all the documentation. It's your job to get it all and then get it to the underwriter. In this situation, there's just different types. That's all I'm saying. And then one or other is not necessarily better than the other. It just depends on
collecting the documentation from some of these borrowers is the biggest challenge. And so why you created that, and you have systems, you know how to handhold them and talk to them and speak their language and do all that. Where Nick's already went and bought 4 more properties by the time he was dealing with trying to get a 1003 form from his. You know,
so
what I mean?
let me we're running a little close on time, so I want to make sure I get through all the questions. So next question was, is there a limit on interest rate charged applied to loan modification? So we have not done a lot of loan modifications. Have you seen a lot of loan modifications come through on the seller financing space? I have not. I'm just curious if you.
I have, because I bought that pool of loans, and so we have.
Yeah, but that's because you're dealing with borrowers that weren't underwritten correctly. None of those borrowers went through the RMLO process.
No, they bought these things they buy them with less than a security deposit.
$500 in a Walmart gift card, and they're in the deal, right?
But so it's not a great example, but I am doing it.
The question is, people that went through the underwriting process, that went through an RMLO, do you see a lot of loan modifications as a result of that process? I do not. Do you?
No.
So the question,
you know why? Because they all have a massive amount of equity right now, and they keep paying. They pay.
So that's why this part of this process is so important. So the question, I don't know. So on a loan modification, I think at the end of the day, I don't know how much the interest rate really is. The interest rate is a component of the payment, right?
They still have to qualify. What I typically do, depending on what I do, is I give them a trial plan. And if they succeed with the trial plan, I decide how much. I take a deposit of some sort. I do a trial plan, and if they hit the trial plan, and depending on their situation, I just throw it to the back of the loan and get a performing note.
The question was, can I charge whatever I want for interest on a loan modification? And I guess the answer is I would never charge more than the keep it a qualified mortgage, number one. Right. Number two, the chances are you're probably gonna have to make a rate adjustment to get the payment down lower anyway. That's the whole point why you're doing a loan modification. So I would say it's probably still limited if you're going to keep it qualified to the APR plus 6.5%. All right, next question, because I want to get through these real quick. Do you charge the escrow at closing and hold escrow, property taxes, insurance rolled into the payment, the P&I monthly payment? Well, it's PITI there. Or do you leave it to borrow? I never leave tax and insurance to the borrower. The whole reason why we do underwriting and use a servicer is to escrow taxes and insurance. For $35 a month or whatever you pay for it, I have no desire to do it. I don't even know by law, can you? Under Dodd-Frank,
I know what I know. As far as the seller finance transaction, you are required to collect escrows for at least the first 5 years. It used to be 3 years.
And you can release them. You don't have to do you don't have to do PMI. You don't have to do PMI, but you do have to escrow taxes and insurance and so forth. So, and you would not want to do it any other way. I'm telling you right now, there's no reason.
You do not want it. Yeah, you want
to let the borrower responsible, even at a 50% LTV. You do not want to do it because you're just creating a problem that you're going to eventually have to manage. You're going to have to do, corporate reserves and all kinds of stuff. Get the money, collect it, put it in escrow, and do it that way. All right, so let's go here. Let's keep going here.
Someone asked, can you pass the fees on the $950 fee to the borrower? And the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Why would you do anything else?
Or the lender.
Yeah, I'm not a charity. I'm giving you the opportunity for home ownership and a property to do it when other people will not. So
lenders do that 99.9% of the time.
Yeah. They say are undocumented buyers at a certain price point of homes around 100K. there's different undocumented or documented buyers at all price points. It's just relative to what you want to be being a creative, how you want to lend that note. Let's see, it says here, all they want is their money and what great payers. Okay, good. Let's see. Will the wrap buyer need to have the deed if I'm acquiring a seller financing on a land contract? Well, as far as best business practices, I very rarely do land contracts. I always do deed of trust or mortgage deeds or whatever it might be for that particular state. That deed of ownership gets transferred. I act just like a bank. I teach how to be the bank, and banks do not deal in land contracts, and they don't hold deeds on anything they lend on. So that's
I can tell you that I bought a contract for deed portfolio, and I mean, it was worth it. And then you can sell, I can buy, I have the deed, and then it was sold. So I actually took over the payment. I took over the current contract for deeds. Nick nailed it. Like, give them the house, give them the deed, become the lender, be the bank, pay out, get all the tax and insurance escrowed, and just sit back and collect your money. And because, perfect example, I have contract for deeds that our company's on title. So who's getting, when they are in default, the water and taxes and all the garbage that's getting hit to us now, and we have liability. As a lender, you really, really have little like personal liability when it comes to, because you don't own the property. You're not the owner.
Think of it like
why I
this.
like being the bank better.
Think of it like this. If anybody that's ever had a home mortgage and they made a payment to the bank, what were they responsible for? And what was the bank responsible for? And nothing changes except you're on the side of being the bank instead of being the borrower. That's it. We already talked about this in all the classes. So let's see. One more question, and I'm going to, Sri had a question that she wanted to ask. I'm going to unmute her so she can ask about the loan modification. Just again, like we literally got about 4 minutes left. Let's see. What was the last question? When looking for an RMLO, is there certain questions I should ask them in order to know that they are familiar with working with the private lenders and not institutional lender? I don't think so. It's underwriting is underwriting. I don't think there's any issues with that at all. So who generates the loan docs? That's a great question. We're going to have our attorney on another office hours. I don't know if it's going to be next week or the week following. I know we're going to have one of our servicers on, and then we're going to have one of our attorneys that creates all the loan docs and talk about that. So that doesn't get created by Sylvia or the RMLO. What the person that preps the loan docs, which is usually an attorney, they take the underwriting package that Sylvia creates. And then from that's how the loan docs are created, because it has all the term and the rate on it. So I am going to, let's go ahead and unmute. I think that answers all the questions.
I have one more. I just want to give one more fiat before we bring on Sri. The whole key to this big picture, guys, is when someone's in default, they put their 20,000 down, and you're charging them $1,000 a month plus tax and insurance, principal, interest, tax, insurance, and servicing, PITIS, right? Which is super important because it adds up. And then they go into default a year later, and they're like, oh, well, you took advantage of me. I couldn't afford to make this payment, and you just took the money from me. And that's where Sylvia comes in and goes, and we go, hello.
Well, that's what Sylvia said earlier. Disclosure,
documented. You absolutely could qualify. And that's why we're not afraid of owner occupied properties, because they're not investors and they're willing to stay and pay. That's what I love about it.
All about the disclosure part of it in the beginning.
Correct.
The disclosures at the RMLO level, and any additional disclosures that get handled at the closing table from the title attorney, escrow officer, whoever it is. So, all right, we're gonna open this up for one quick question live with Sri, and then we'll be done. And then we'll send all the notes out. We'll post them on the private Facebook group. Anything that Sylvia gets, we'll make sure we put in the deals as well. So, okay, I think we're here with Sri now. So tell us what you got, Sri.
I think she needs to be unmuted.
She just was. There you go. I think I just asked her to
There you
unmute.
go. Yeah.
All right, super. Can you hear us?
Yes, Nick.
Hey,
Can
Oh,
you-
it's a he. Sorry.
hear me?
Hey, there's the video. Sorry about that. All good.
It's okay. That's okay.
What can I answer for you?
So I buy non-performing seconds, and these are, I mean, depending on the state, right? Some of the California, there is no SOL, or the SOL still works in my favor. So for those notes, the borrower haven't paid since 2008, 2009, and their interest rate seconds were 12%, 13%, and I reduced it down to 9% or 9.5%. What I wanted to ask is, I'm not originating a new note, but I'm just modifying the existing note where, you know, depending upon, you know, some of the payments, like interest rate, accrued interest, late fees, everything is put on the back end, but still some of them it is re-amortized and the loan is recast basically. So at that point of time, am I looking at still the APOR and the minimum, you know, you came up with 9.5, right? Based on the current rate, 9.5 or 9.3, whatever that was.
Whatever it is.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
do I have to stick to that? Because I'm not.
So
technically
I
originating
am
the
not
loan.
I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA, not a financial advisor. Here's what I understand about loan modifications. If you do a loan modification and anything changes negatively to the borrower, then they go through the underwriting process. Okay. If it changes positively, like the payment goes down, for example, and you reduce the payment from $900 a month to $800, there is no formal underwriting process. Sylvia, is that how you understand it as well?
Correct. Yes. Mhm.
So you could change the terms of the deal and reset that 30-year mortgage back to from 15 years remaining to 30 and lower the payment by $100 and change all that. But then you would go through the traditional underwriting process. That would be my recommendation, especially if you have multiple of these.
I'll give you a real life example because you're in a great position if you bought a bunch of non-performing seconds a few years ago and now the market went nuts.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of equity on those seconds, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
and you're
yeah.
protected because you're secured to the property. And so I had a similar deal. It was a $30,000 loan that was originated in 2010. Okay.
Yeah.
So think about at 8% and it was a deferred payment up to 5 years, and then 5 years, and then another 5 years happened, and it just kept escalating to this big monster number that was really, I was like, well, I'd already written it off. So I was like, let's just come to a number that makes sense for all of us. Let's make the payment affordable. Let's make sure that they start paying. So we're in good faith and we secure it and we modify it. So I just did a modification. Nick will probably say, just find a good attorney and say, this is what I want to do, make it work so we're protected.
Yeah, of course.
That's what I did.
Attorney to do the loan mod, but I was just asking because the attorney will go by the, what is it called? Usury rate. As long as the rate is not above the usury rate, they said it, but I didn't know about the APO or where you came up with the 9.3.
I can tell you right now, I'm too nice. And I tend to make it a better win for them. I made a great return and I just want the monthly income.
Yeah,
but I know a lot of people are like, why in the world did you do that? They didn't pay you for 11 years. They owe you the money. Their house is worth triple what you owe. I mean, just charge them the full deal. And I said, I just wanted to get done. I wanted to get done and get income.
Hey, we got to go because we got another call at the top of the hour. Thanks
All right.
everybody for joining. Follow us on Facebook. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll put all this in the notes, and you know how to reach us through the Facebook group. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you guys on the next call.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Sylvia. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right.